I am joined by an award-winning investigative journalist, Sharyl Attkisson. She's the author of a groundbreaking book called Follow the Science. Her book uncovers the deep systemic corruption and even collusion between government agencies that deal with health subjects of all kinds, and the pharma industry, the medical industry as a whole, and touches on universities, research, journalists, and the media, of course, and also scientific journals that are supposed to be above reproach. So she uncovers this corruption in a way, telling stories of her journey when she first got into this area, this beat of I guess the medical industry and its corruption years ago, and she's been reporting faithfully ever since. What we have now, though, is a time, this book is coming out at a time this last year that is more helpful to this Trump administration and the Making America Healthy Again initiative that he counts as his or one of the top legacies of his administration. That's what he wants. By the end of 4 years, that America is healthy again. And so reformers like RFK Jr., Jay Bhattacharya, and others that are going to take that helm are committed to that, of course. And I think that what they're going to do is not overhaul the system and reform it, but in some areas they need to just utterly demolish it. So welcome, hero journalist Sharyl Attkisson. Thank you for joining me today for this conversation.
Well, I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Well, let's briefly go. We've got so much data to go over and reforms to discuss, but I want to go briefly over your journey and how you start out as just like everybody else, just assuming that the system, that doctors, that hospitals, that pharmaceutical companies had the best interest and the health of the American people at heart. They could be trusted.
Looking back, it sounds so naive that as late as the 2000 time period, with all the government corruption that I'd covered over the years, I still never thought about how our health medical establishment and federal health agencies might also be wrapped up in that world. And when I started peeling back the layers and finding out what was really happening, it was almost unbelievable initially. And then it became to be such a big story to me because these scandals affect millions upon millions of people and are not being well covered, particularly by the medical and health reporters who you would think might be unearthing some of these corruption and questions and safety issues, but are not, for reasons some of which I discuss in the book. But yeah, I think a lot of Americans, we are really hard pressed to think that our own doctors aren't well read, are giving us information that's not true, that the medical health associations, medical schools, continuing medical education classes, they've all been co-opted by these same vested interests and their propaganda, as have our government entities. So it's pretty hard to escape. It's reached into every aspect of our health life.
I look back 30 years or so when people were talking about vaccines and just questioning. They're not saying all vaccines are bad. They're not coming to necessarily scientific conclusions, but they're saying there's a problem here. Parents were saying there's a problem. I don't know about any scientists or medical doctors, but I know this. Every last one of them was smeared and slandered and mocked as conspiracy theorists, tinfoil hat wearers, and lunatics. And, I'd often wonder as a mother, my last child got no vaccinations. All the rest did. I wondered myself. And then as I started looking at it, but you still never know. And now don't you think that in a way COVID was a blessing from God in the sense that coming from the COVID disaster, people's eyes have been opened, the light bulbs went off, and there's never any going back to trusting the medical establishment like we once did?
Well, I think you've put your finger on it. I believe the medical establishment, our federal health agencies were so audacious in something they'd done for years, putting out propaganda and misinformation. But they were so obvious about it that people had never really given it much thought, as I hadn't before the 2000 time period, before I was assigned to cover the stories. People who'd never given it much thought suddenly started looking at it and thinking, if they're being disingenuous about this, what else have they not been truthful about in the past? And it resulted, I think, in making activists out of people who never saw themselves that way, but came to be very involved and very interested once the experience of COVID was behind us.
And your book, I recommend this book because not only will we not be able to cover even a close to a small percentage of what she discusses, and it's just an enjoyable read. It's a great read. But at the back are lists of resources like the various organizations, journalists, medical professionals that you can research and start following in order to understand this issue better. And I think we have such an incredible opportunity now, and it's probably a once in a generation or in history opportunity to turn this back. And I think, and at WorldNetDaily, we believe this needs to be covered like white on rice, and people need to join in and become part of the solution. So buy the book just for those kinds of things that you'll never get out of this. You started covering this, and some of the first tragic examples that you give in the book, the babies and preemie babies that were put on a very, very dangerous protocol without full disclosure or transparency to the moms. They were very vulnerable mothers. The next one, I really want to talk about this Alzheimer's disease medicine. And I think it's important to give some of these examples besides COVID. We all lived through the COVID hoax, but very few of us know these other stories. So start with some of the ones that hit you most in the heart and brain.
Well, most of the book is not about COVID or vaccines because the COVID experience I knew would be well covered by others that were writing books and so on right after COVID. So I wanted to take a more global look at how what we saw happen during COVID, and some of that is addressed in the book, how it tells so much about why we're suffering from chronic health emergencies in this country that our doctors for all these years seem not to notice. We all see it going on. We see that we're an unhealthy society, our kids are unhealthy, and yet everyone's kind of ignoring it, at least on an official level, but for the fact that they want to treat it with expensive therapies and medicines, but not figure out the causes. But along the way, I covered so many stories that just shocked my sensibilities. And I know as people read the books, it shocks them too. To give an example of why, to sort of establish why you cannot trust everything you hear from the medical establishment, scientific journals, and doctors at face value, as we would like to do, with some anecdotes and examples of some unbelievable stories. One of them, as you mentioned, was an experiment the federal government funded and knew about with some of the most prestigious hospitals and health institutions in this country on premature babies. And it was an experiment on extremely premature babies, largely getting African American single mothers, the ones I spoke to sign up to consent to this allegedly dangerous study without disclosing these risks to them. The women saying nothing. They weren't even told, in some cases, the babies were in a study. They were just being told, oh, this will help your baby. So women coming to the hospital in an emergency situation with extremely premature babies were signed on to this study, not knowing what it was according to them. Long story short, they found out years later, through listening to the news and other things, that their babies had been in a study they didn't know about, and that according to the government's own watchdog group, some babies died as a result. And the women, again, were not told about these risks. The government's own ethics body that's supposed to police this sort of thing made a very stark finding that said the consent forms were inadequate. I mean, this was huge to be saying this about the federal government's own consent forms and processes. What happened as I covered that story? Well, there was an uprising not against the allegedly unethical study, but against the ethics watchdog that brought it to light. he was spanked down into oblivion. He was, basically told, with all these researchers got together with the federal government, published in scientific journals saying, he's going to hurt science if he goes down this path of punishing us for the consent forms that he says were inadequate. Poof, all of it kind of went away. And that was just the first case that I was just so shocked by. But really, when you start to look, decades and decades, there are examples of the federal government embarking upon unethical studies that harmed people and keeping those harms hidden. You can go back to the Tuskegee syphilis experiments. That was like one of the first most widely publicized one, where the government experimented on Black men who had syphilis for decades, kept them in a study without telling them, even when a cure was discovered for syphilis, not telling them about it or giving them the treatment for it.
All you have to
So,
do to know that there's corruption and deception, and that people's lives are saving people's lives and making them healthy is not the goal, is to look at each one of these. You don't need just Tuskegee alone, but it's so old that you can kind of, well, maybe things have changed. But these babies, this was not too long ago, and they actually killed babies. Let me ask you, I don't remember who was behind the study. Was it going to, what was the incentive to lie? Who gains?
typically, these studies, people may, why would anyone want to do this? The excuse is often given, oh, it helps the greater good. Maybe it doesn't help the babies in the study, but we'll be able to help other future babies. And that's this age-old push me, pull you between researchers who want to study for the greater good, even if their study may potentially harm the research subjects individually. They still say, well, we want to help the greater good. That was the only, tried to follow the money on this one because I assumed there was a product that could come to light out of this. That's typically why the researchers want so
That's what I
badly to
thought.
get. I could not find that piece of the puzzle, and I
So
really
it's
did
almost
dig.
like a Dr. Mengele kind of thing. It's the, the fire in the minds of men who, we want to figure this out, and as long as this other baby's dying for the greater good, that's okay. But they will literally experiment on little babies, knowing that not giving them oxygen or giving them too much, or at improper intervals, whatever it was in that particular study, was going to probably kill some. And they would have never have known about it unless it had been reported by, I guess, a watchdog group.
Well, one example in that study, and they will say, so in their defense, the researchers will say, we didn't know it was going to kill babies. I mean, that was blown apart by the ethics watchdog that said that was a foreseeable risk. But they, of course, aren't saying they thought it would kill babies. But here's one thing not disclosed to the women, just to show you how shocking this is. The premature babies were put on oxygen monitors because they need oxygen after they're born that early, and they were put on a level of oxygen and kept in that range regardless of the baby's needs, instead of it being adjusted day to day or hour to hour as the baby needs. And the oxygen monitors, unbeknownst to the parents, were disabled to intentionally give false readings so that the caretakers of the hospital would not adjust the oxygen for the good of the babies. What
That's
mother, if they knew this, would allow that?
that's the thing that really hits home in most stories. There's that one fact, that one revelation. And when they faked the dials and the monitors, so if a nurse came in and said, "Oh my goodness, this child needs more oxygen," she would naturally, or call a doctor, turn the dial. But they prevented the nurses, the healthcare professionals, from even saving the life, or preventing some other injury to a child. So that's one. And that and Tuskegee should be all that we need. And probably most people watching the show already are convinced. Let's talk a little bit about money, because then we could go in to that Alzheimer's one. I could not believe that by 2027, you said that medicines alone will account for $1.9 trillion in expenditures by private and by individuals, and I suppose institutions, on just pharmaceuticals.
Every time I cover these stories on the proliferation of medicine versus looking at causes and curing us in advance, making sure we're not exposed to the problems, Some advocate who looks into this will say to me, the health system is not sustainable. We cannot spend this much money on medicine and drugs and treatments and not go bankrupt as a society. This is going to break us. Now, we maintain this huge debt. In other words, we don't pay for what we spend. So it kind of masks the serious nature of what's happening. But even we're going to talk about the Alzheimer's drug aducanumab. That alone, had that been prescribed to all the Medicare patients that people think could have been helped by this drug that the experts said probably didn't work, if they all had gotten it, was so expensive, it would have bankrupted the Medicare system. One drug, as much as they were charging, tens and tens of thousands of dollars for a year's treatment with this one drug. So the costs are
Imagine
just
how overwhelming this problem is, that you have the CDC, the NIH, I start forgetting. I have a list of all of them. All of these agencies, they all have bureaucrats within the agencies, many of which have gone from industry to government, government to industry, or universities, research programs, etc. And then you multiply it out by decades of history of false medical reports, false research, false funding, fake approvals, each of which expands and explodes the bottom line, the dollars. And each one of those dollars is paid by you and me. It's not as if there were just millions of people or billions worldwide taking drugs they shouldn't and paying for it themselves, it would still be atrocious. But the taxpayers paying for it, and it will bankrupt the system. So this monster is so huge. Do you think that it can be tamed? Do you think it can be actually killed, the monster that RFK and others have to slay, the dragon?
I'm not an expert in process and systems. I'd like to think so, but they have grown so powerful and they are so endemic in terms of the pharmaceutical influence, not just in our political figures, which we've known about by contributions so that they vote, they can write, the pharmaceutical industry can write the bills, make sure things do and don't go in there, make sure certain hearings are and are not had. But we also know they're now in the media, so the media doesn't report certain things because they fund so much of the news in the media. And then the piece of the puzzle I try to fill in and follow the science, they're part of the medical establishment. How do you extricate, decades of a well thought out plan by the pharmaceutical industry? How do you get rid of that in 4 years? It's going to be really tough.
It is going to be tough. Let's look at this Alzheimer's study and medication, because that's enough to just make you sick to your stomach. It's just horrendous. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Well, this is one case where there is no logical explanation I can find for why the FDA did what it did, other than money or hidden conflicts of interest. So this is a drug that's touted as the first Alzheimer's cure because it can do something that other drugs have not tried to do for Alzheimer's disease.
Was that
However,
2020?
there's a great, pardon me?
Was that in 2020?
I would say it's around the 2020 time period that this drug was being researched by the company, and the drug studies that it was doing were halted midstream because they were futile. It's called a futility finding. When a drug company understands that this study is so bad, it's not going to result in something good in the end or possibly good, they stop it midstream so as not to hurt the patients in the study and not to waste time and money. So they stop the studies. Lo and behold, a few months later, the same company comes back with FDA in partnership and says to the FDA at large, oh, we missed something in the incompleted studies. There is a benefit we could find, and it's slight, but it could be meaningful. So please approve the drug without a completed study even having been done. So they take it to an advisory council meeting where the outside advisors for the FDA, the experts, hear all the evidence. The experts, who usually are pretty pharmaceutical friendly, by the way, that's why they get to sit on these advisory committees these days. The experts hear, and it shocks them. The FDA presents a joint presentation promoting the medicine with the drug company.
The FDA and the drug company.
Yeah, they're joint, which is, they say, the advisors told me, unheard of. Instead of sort of a neutral analysis, it was like a marketing presentation by the FDA on behalf of the drug. So I believe there were 12 members of the advisory council. 11 of the 12 said, do not approve this drug. And one of them withheld a vote, just they didn't say either way. But in other words, not one advisor thought this drug should be approved in its current state. They thought there were potential risks with brain problems and even death. They thought that there was perhaps no benefit to it, certainly not enough evidence on the record. What does the FDA do? It approves the drug at this tremendous cost. I think it was something like $57,000 per patient per year. That's what was going to break the Medicare system if it were widely prescribed.
So if you think about this, the FDA did a joint recommendation or promotion of a pharmaceutical company's drug that was not properly studied. There was no study that was complete on the drug. And on the board that is convened to give their recommendations, I don't know how many people are on the board, but they're scientific and medical experts. They said, do not recommend the drug, do not approve it to go on the market, and they approved it anyway.
That's right. And, all these investigations were started by Congress and other agencies to find out where was this conflict of interest, what's going on. And one scathing result came back from the House or the Senate. But of course, nothing was done. Nothing is ever done. And
because they come out with a strongly worded condemnation or, expression of concern.
Yeah, they did. To my surprise, even the specialists that deal with Alzheimer's, again, who are usually pretty pharmaceutical friendly for various reasons, they came out with a position statement and said this either shouldn't be taken or needs to be carefully monitored. FDA needs to be looked at for this conflicted decision that shouldn't have been made. Like, it was pretty roundly discussed as one of the worst and most egregious examples of FDA doing something that all the experts.
And let's be very clear here. We're talking about every patient that takes this drug over a course of a year would expend $56,000 for this pill or pills.
Well, let me finish a little bit of the story. Not enough people took the drug. They cut the price in half. Still not enough people would take the drug because of the recommendations of the experts. Actually, word got around about this. And they needed, meaning the drug company, needed to get the drug approved by Medicare to make money. Medicare needed to put it on its list where Medicare would reimburse. Without it, who could afford it? Nobody could afford to pay. If all of us taxpayers pay through Medicare, it masks the cost and maybe it could be prescribed. Well, Medicare made the decision, surprisingly, not to cover this drug. And so it was ultimately pulled from the market pretty quickly. But same company, similar drug, similar circumstance, comes up with another medicine approved over the objections again of the advisors, and that one's still on the market and Medicare is covering it.
Well, is that at the $26,000 a year mark
Yes.
or fee?
Yeah.
So, and they came back with a different name of a drug, right? The drug came.
Medically, I don't want to try to describe it and be wrong. It's the same class, I believe. It claims to do the same thing. I don't know if they just sort of tweaked what they had and tried to put together a better presentation on it because the other one had such a bad reputation. And it apparently worked because, again, even though the experts I spoke with thought this was a similar drug that should not be prescribed, this time that one made the bar and Medicare is now covering the cost.
It would have cost Medicare $1.5 trillion every year if everybody used that drug. $1.5 trillion. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, that's from Public Citizen, which is a watchdog group that monitors these things. They figured the costs on that.
Imagine everybody who's listening to this, watching this, one drug that has no business being on the market. I'll say that. That's my opinion. It has no business being on the market. It looks to me as if fraud and perhaps money was changed hand. Again, that's my opinion. I'm not stating it as a fact. I don't know if you can get sued for saying something like that. But that corrupt process that was clearly engineered to arrive at a predetermined conclusion put a drug on the market that if they cut it in half from the $56,000 a year, it was going to be a $500 billion every year. Medicaid did not approve it. They come back, they slap lipstick on the pig, put a different label on it. That, again, is just my assumption. I normally don't give disclosures like this, but Cheryl, but I'm just wondering. And they cut it the price in half, but that would say that it would be $250 billion a year if every Alzheimer patient took this drug and was approved for receiving it by their doctor or other healthcare professional. $500
Well,
billion.
for our own good, yours and mine, and because I try to be precise and was very careful in the book, um, people who promote the drug and the drug maker would say it does work. They would say it is safe. Obviously, if the FDA approved it, the FDA's official position is that it is safe and effective. And they disagree with the experts who say that this medicine shouldn't be on the market. So, yes, you're entitled to your opinion, absolutely. But on the record, there are obviously other sides to that, and you can read all about it in the book and get the full.
Right.
Yeah.
And there I don't even know how you write a book, let alone do an hour or so interview on something like this. I'm looking at NIH funds that fund 58,000 different organizations, institutions, what have you, individuals in research to the tune of $33 billion.
Well, that's to explain. I don't know if people understand how the government can control the narrative. Let's say you and I are interested in why so many kids supposedly have mixed up feelings, gender dysphoria, where boys want to be girls, girls want to be boys. That is clearly, according to scientists, a hormone related problem or metabolism, all kinds of things. We know that things in our environment, from 5G radiation to the stuff that's in our food, it's been established by studies that it can cause, I guess what you would say is gender confusion or problems with hormones. So maybe somebody would like to research that. But if the government doesn't want to go down that road, they just want you to think this is all normal and you can treat with expensive treatments to make the boys girls and girls boys. Well, they're not going to fund the studies that would get at the heart of the causes. They're only going to fund the studies for the treatments. That's just sort of a simplified example to say the government controls the terms under which studies are conducted, which ones get approved. And scientists have told me they believe in a lot of studies that they'd like to conduct, but if the studies are not framed in terms of a question the government slash pharmaceutical industry wants answered, the study is typically not going to be funded. So they have to come up with studies that get money, and that's how the whole system is controlled.
Well, that has been a question that I've long wanted answered, and I already have my conclusion, but I wanted a solution because I wonder why the federal government, I don't know what percentage of research is done by the federal government, but I would say that is probably the majority. And taxpayers really don't know where this money is going to.
Well, they don't. The distinction is they fund the majority of the research, but they don't conduct the majority of the research. They hand out the money to the hospitals and the academic institutions that partner with the pharmaceutical industry. And so, yeah, I think the government should do more of its own research in an unbiased fashion. I think that would go a long way to
How would
solving
you do
the
that?
problem.
Because
Well, I heard RFK Jr. talk about this, so he probably has a better roadmap in mind. But I believe he said, or someone I've interviewed who's going to be on in one of these new health agencies, that take the it's kind of crazy when you think about it. Most of the drug studies on drug safety and drug approval and vaccine safety and vaccine approval are conducted by the drug companies, and we are to believe what they report. And we don't even know what studies they won't publish because if they don't come out right these days, they don't publish them at all. So there may be nine
and they
negative
also
studies.
fake the results.
Well, so when you finally get a study, or when they finally get a study that looks positive, You don't know how many came out negative before they were able to tweak one that came out positive. And even then, as you see in the book, the editors of prestigious medical journals have said studies are typically, and the things in the medical journals are not to be believed anymore because they've been so co-opted by the pharmaceutical industry. They're not being checked well by the publishers, who you think might be doing
Peer
oversight,
review.
reviewers. Yeah, there's a lot of conflicts, problems, and mistakes. I find them in studies. I have gotten studies corrected and changed because I, as an outsider, have been able to observe this makes no sense. This is wrong. The read is wrong. The data is wrong, something like that. Why isn't this being caught by the peer reviewers and the journals? Well, it's explained by the heads of some of the journals, including the British journal Lancet, the former head of the New England Journal of Medicine. They say the journal system has become really conflicted. Most of the journals make their money through pharmaceutical advertising. There it is again.
Okay. That was one of my reforms, and I have a list of 100 here from you, and I'm so excited to really spend time on that. I think my top reform would be to ban or prohibit contributions by any company in the pharmaceutical industry from going to any pharma-related organization, any medical health related organization, any study, any research. If they do the research, if they fund the research, it's done in-house. It has their name on it prominently. This is from Pfizer. And so you already know it's transparent. You know what the conflict of interest is. They may even do a good study occasionally, but at least you would know who's doing it. And I think that they should be banned because money is the root of I don't know, almost all of this. Yeah, it's the root of all evil, but it's the root of all influence. And every single story, every investigation that you did in this book always leads back to money, other than we couldn't figure out with the babies and the oxygen. So, and the pharmaceutical industry is probably not the only industry, because I think these big healthcare systems or hospital systems are probably also a problem, the way they're eliminating.
Yeah, and they
Go
get a
ahead.
lot of money from pharma too. So I won't name the hospital, but people who were high ranking at the hospital and doctors who worked there, this is during COVID, strongly believed, suspected slash believed that the hospital was doing policies that didn't make sense on COVID because the hospital got a large lump sum payment from the NIH. And I did find that hospital got this huge, can't remember how big it was, hundreds of millions of dollars or something, maybe even more, around that time. But the announcement said from an anonymous donor. And I think that's a problem when a public hospital, really any hospital, is allowed to keep its donors secret, then you don't know. I mean, that basically opens up the possibility that a special interest, pharmaceutical company or otherwise, can just make a lump sum payment to a hospital, and the hospital doesn't say they got it, but suddenly the hospital, very influential on the scene, is instituting policies that may not make sense or be good for your health, and you don't know why. So I think the transparency issue that you mentioned is huge. Every website from Mayo Clinic to MedPage to the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia that's, in my view, my opinion, bought out by the pharmaceutical industry should have to have a disclosure as to who funds them right on that homepage, in a very easy to find way, so that people understand when they're reading their information, they're not getting an unconflicted view of the science.
I don't think I can come up off the cuff with a specific example, but I can say this, that I think, for instance, pharmaceutical companies were banned from advertising when I was a young person. And I don't remember the year, but when they allowed it, it was shocking to many, many people because, there's so many problems with it. But so if you can ban a particular industry from hawking their wares on advertising, do not take your wealth and then buy influence from hospitals, medical journals. Obviously, the media is biased because they get so many millions and millions of dollars from pharmaceutical advertising. You can go through every single industry that they give to, and they're literally buying their influence. Why can't we just ban it?
Well, there are serious questions in our society about doing that. And I think the system has broken down where the pressure should have come and used to come is you expect the pharmaceutical industry to want to buy influence. In fact, they have a fiduciary duty to their shareholders and their company, you could argue, to make money any way they can legally. And it's legal to give contributions to members of Congress. It's legal to buy ads. What should have happened is Congress should have ethical standards. The medical associations should have ethical standards that create firewalls where they don't accept the money. And certainly the media should have firewalls. All of that fell apart in the early 2000s. It's totally gone. I think it's traditionally been left up to these other institutions to do the right thing and police themselves. And when they've dropped the ball, I don't know how you stop it. And I'll tell you one other thing. The pharmaceutical industry is very clever and has unlimited money to figure out ways to get influence, even if it's prohibited from direct contributions. It gives to nonprofits. But guess what the nonprofits are? Sometimes the nonprofits are simply a pass through for money going to the same interests, either to media or to industry or to journalism groups or whatever they are. It's just a one step removed, a little harder to draw the straight line
I
to.
agree. I understand that. I do. And I am a free speech advocate. You could almost say absolutist. But um, the medical industry, people's lives and health, this industry, or the pharmaceutical industry, is one of those unique industries that benefit from so much from the federal government. They are, well, do we require everybody to put a label on everything in warning? But we require pharmaceuticals companies to always put a label on their medicine. Why is that fair? I mean, why? Is
Well,
it for the
and by the way, they don't. We can talk about that too. They get through loopholes where they're not doing that right now in their
and
TV
nobody
ads.
reads it, and the doctors don't show it to you anyway. They bring out 5 vaccinations for your kids. They take it out of the box. They walk out. The disclosures are in the box, and the parent's not going to read the fine print now at that point anyway. So they're shooting their kids up with these harmful medicines. Um, but I would say, to me, from reading your book and from reading many other things, I think that you don't attempt to get the media to have a high standard of ethics. They do not, and they will never reinstate that. I don't think that you get universities. I don't think you get medical journals and science journals and all of these other organizations or fields to start policing. Once the toothpaste is out of the tube, you can't put it back. And in one fell swoop, if you said to the pharmaceutical industry, no, every dollar you give to a nonprofit will be regulated. We will research it and regulate it. And I think that would, or not allow you to do it. I think that would be huge. Tell me more about where money is influencing our medical industry and pharmaceuticals.
Let me give you two ends of the spectrum. In medical school, for example, because there are a lot of examples, but one I point out is something called the Merck Manual, which is a reference book that some doctor or doctoral students call the most widely used reference in med school. Some people call it the Bible for medicine. Huge reference book, published by Merck, which has been found guilty or accused of tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in fraud and paid fines and everything for lying about its medicine. But they're allowed to publish this book, and the medical schools use them, and the FDA allows it because Merck pinky promises that there's no conflict of interest. They have a separate editorial staff. So I looked in to see, well, what does Merck, for example, teach doctors to be about its controversial Gardasil vaccine for cervical cancer? And I immediately saw just the biggest falsehood in there that said, telling in this book reference that there are no serious adverse events reported from Gardasil vaccine, which is false. You can look at the label of the vaccine anywhere, as I published in the book. There is a laundry list of dozens of serious side effects reported, everything from paralysis to death. but doctors are being taught in the Merck manual that there are none. After this book was published and I've been talking about it, Merck has now changed the online version and removed that sentence that says there are no serious adverse events. But did they put in the adverse events that are on their label? No. So that's still, in my view, misleading. There are other examples. So doctors are tainted on the front end. And then let's look at continuing medical education classes. Those courses are often taught by doctors who are working for the pharmaceutical industry, but do not disclose that in an easy to see, obvious way. And for whatever reason, the doctor students who have to take these classes often don't ask or don't care that they're being taught what I believe is slanted and sometimes I've proven inaccurate information promoting a medicine or vaccine because they're there for the drug company. So on both ends, doctors are getting it and not really thinking about it, and it's being allowed.
Well, there again, this is an ethical conflict of interest. Merck putting out a medical manual doesn't even make sense. It's just, we're talking about common sense being restored to government in the Trump administration, and this doesn't make any common sense. And I would assume that people are going from the CDC and the NIH and the FDA and all the rest into the pharmaceutical industry after they leave. These are obvious common sense ethical issues that could be just banned with law or even executive orders and regulatorily.
I think what you said about common sense is the biggest thing I noticed over the past 20 years, and I think other people do too. That stuff that simply makes common sense to us, the government either pretends doesn't exist or ignores or overlooks. And it only makes sense in the context of there is some kind of money changing hands because too much of that is going on. And it would be awesome if, and I hope this happens, the heads of these agencies now, the new heads, start taking a look at the stuff that we're talking about that is, some of it's no brainers in terms of what can and should be done. I believe RFK Jr., I don't know if he'll propose this, but in an interview with me prior to him being nominated for HHS secretary, he said he wants to ban pharmaceutical advertising. So we could go back to that. I mean, I don't know if Congress will ever vote for that because they get so much money from them. But if so, think about what could happen if the media slash news media is no longer funded to the tunes of tens of billions of dollars by the pharmaceutical industry. Will the media go back to reporting, as we were doing in the early 2000s, by the way? Will we go back to reporting more honestly and fairly and accurately about this industry? And how much would it change if we started doing that again? It could be really positive development.
I think some things, if you allow it to if you just nibble around the edges because you say, well, let's be cautious, just banning something like that, who does it hurt? I'll tell you, the only group that it hurts is the pharmaceutical industry. I don't think Americans believe that hurting or that restraining the pharmaceutical industry could any way, shape, or form be deleterious to the American health. So I agree that I don't think we should have advertising on television by pharmaceutical companies. Actually, I would love to have them gone because I hate to look at them. It's so embarrassing, when you see them, that all these people are laughing and they're riding bikes and horses and everything, and then there's this voice underneath saying, and this may cause suicidal tendencies and you may have heart attacks and all the rest. It's so absurd. So I would like to have them gone, but I think it just what was wrong? What have we benefited by having advertising by pharmaceuticals? Can you think of anything?
I've never looked at it from that aspect. I'm sure the industry would say people have known about and had access to medicines and treatments that they wouldn't have otherwise known about and gone to see their doctors that maybe they wouldn't have done so. But I'm with you in thinking that the net effect of this has just been really a co-opting of our entire society and a push toward treatments and really benefiting from chronic diseases rather than benefiting society by trying to find the causes and exposures that are creating them.
Viagra causes blindness.
It can, yeah.
It can cause blindness. Not in all men. It can cause blindness. But why didn't we know this before Viagra came out and was selling for years?
Well, the real side effects of a medicine, a vaccine or another medicine, scientists say are not fully known until the medicine's been on the market for some years. One FDA scientist told me 12 years and millions of people have taken it because the studies that happen in advance are fairly short term. And remember, they're done in a healthier population usually than the people who are really going to be taking the drug with their own, exposures and predispositions. People in a study don't have all of those. So you don't really know how it's going to act in the population. And that's why the government is supposed to gather adverse event data reports after these things hit the market and carefully analyze them for new patterns that were undiscovered in studies. This happens all the time. So that's why we didn't know about blindness and Viagra ahead of time. But we should have known about it sooner than it was finally reported by me and by the government, because the government should have been more carefully combing through what I saw when I looked through the adverse event reports. There's a database we can access. Obvious pattern. By the time it was that obvious, I mean, who knows how many men had been hurt by that time. And in the time before warnings went on the label talking about this side effect. So that's just kind of the way it works. And the FDA is not, in my view, been aggressive with combing through these adverse event reports to find new patterns, except to the extent they try to delay the reports or say that the patterns are due to something else. They are not making the proactive, err on the side of safety decisions that you would think our health agencies should be making.
Well, the adverse side effects, you can't even the number that are reported, you said, is probably 1,000. No, the number of actual side effects is probably something like 1,000 to times greater, up to.
Listen, this sounds, every time I look it up, because I don't believe it, it sounds so crazy. But I first heard this stat from Public Citizen, and they do a really good job monitoring this, and it's been repeated. I believe it's for every adverse event that gets reported into the database, because the vast majority are never reported, it implies 10,000 to 100,000 more, which explains why when a drug like Resolin for diabetes was pulled off the market after 12 deaths, I mean, every death is bad, but that doesn't seem like a lot. Well, it's because they understood that for those reports to have been made, that it implied many, many more cases that had not been reported.
I don't know. I'm looking at your 100 examples of reforms that you would put out, and this is a really great list, organized too, and it's on Sheryl's Substack, SharylAttkisson.substack. So that's on your Substack, and I recommend everybody to go there to take a look at this, because they're categorized like mission and priorities and data and studies. So let's just kind of quickly, in an overview of the sections, what do you think right now the mission and priorities of the medical establishment, public and private, are, and how do you think that needs to be changed?
Right now, it's not erring on the side of safety, which is the obvious thing. It's basically not warning of a risk or doing anything about something unless it's so dangerous and so well proven that it's too late to save a lot of people. So there should be emphasis on erring on the side of safety. There should be far more emphasis on preventing and finding the causes of these chronic health disorders rather than just treating them and spending more money on them.
Have you, by the way, this is going in another direction, sorry, but have you received a lot of pushback, and are you undermined or attacked by the pharmaceutical industry? Or are you just too big to take down now because you're so well known about it?
I have not. To the extent that I may be attacked now, I don't think it would come directly. It might come through bots on social media that try to discredit something, or through some kind of third-hand route. But I have not personally heard anything or gotten anything negative about this book or about what I'm discussing.
That's amazing to me. What about transparency and ease of access to where money is going, where it's coming from, who's doing what, the results of studies, transparency and not garbled language, perhaps even something like a Wikipedia. When I say Wikipedia, I just mean something that is easy to navigate, easy to find things, and then also to have some kind of an added feature where individuals can add comments, because when they do comments on regulations, those comments just go into a dark hole. They're not seen by the
and they're
American
filed
people.
by special interests, and yeah.
Exactly. So if commenting was readily available on a website, say they're proposing a particular drug, and people come in and explain why this is so bad, and having even a voting up and down, because the market will come to bear on it and the people will have their voices heard. What do you think about that kind of a thing?
Well, it's tough. There's merit to it, but the pharmaceutical industry knows how to hire or co-opt so-called patients so that they look like real people giving their real opinions. They do that now so that they speak out on websites or start websites that look like a patient safety group protecting you against a drug, but actually the nonprofit or the website was started by the company, and they've got these patients so that when the media searches for a patient or a victim to talk about a drug safety issue, they'll hit upon this nonprofit, and only to be told by the patients that, oh, the drug is good and we really need it. They just figure out ways to influence and things that we haven't even thought of, that they're really good at. But in transparency, I'm just totally against government in general pretends all the information they collect is theirs, and we have to go through hoops to get any of it, and oftentimes they won't let us have any, at least me and the media, when I'm trying to get public health information that's shared readily between the agencies and the pharmaceutical industry, but we're told that it's proprietary and we can't see it. Well, they work for us, we own that information, they collect it on our behalf, and I don't even think we should have to file Freedom of Information Act requests for it, because they've made sure that takes years and costs a lot of money in court. That stuff should be posted in near real time. There are very little rational arguments for not making information that we own about us, collected by people who work for us, available in almost real time for us. And I think that we need to go a long way.
So information across the board, because it is generally paid for or approved by the government, should be available in real time, online, in a format that is easily digestible, searchable, discoverable. It should just be there. It should not look like a government website. It should be open and intuitive, navigable. And it sounds to me as if we need somebody, a team that their full-time job is just monitoring this, that they're adverse. They should be activists in not out of the pharmaceutical industry, not out of even, I don't know what kind of industry they would come from, to have a watchdog on this. Or maybe also put these watchdog groups in as an advisory board, a permanent advisory board over the medical and health industry that is private. It's nonprofit organizations that are well established. You list many of them in the back of your book. Because I don't trust the government. Once RFK's gone, Bhattacharya's moved on, President Trump is no longer in office, we could just revert back to the same horrendous status quo that we have had for decades.
You make a good point. And you talk about posting information in near real time. That in a good system would actually save us money, because do you know how much they stack up these Freedom of Information Act requests? In order to delay the information, they put you at the end of a long queue that they know is going to take years, and they have tons of people trying to obstruct and answer those FOIA requests and make sure that there's excuses and reason not to answer, and then to hear in court, to go through all these hearings when people sue. I think it would actually be a cost-saving thing as well to simply have a system where this stuff automatically goes up or automatically is accessible to the public in near real time.
Don't you think that executives and scientists and government bureaucrats who defraud the public when it comes to life and health, these very dangerous questions, that they should be regularly prosecuted publicly? There should be tremendous transparency. And if an executive that is a multi-millionaire of a pharmaceutical company, for instance, violates ethics laws in a serious violation, that they should go to prison. I think that there's not enough of that. I don't think that the consequences and the punishments are strong enough to deter anybody.
I think that's by design. That's part of the conflict of interest. I have a list in the book of how many of the top pharmaceutical companies, including all the major vaccine makers, have been found guilty or pleaded guilty or settled fraud cases, many of them criminal fraud cases, by paying huge, huge settlements over and over again. I mean, not just one time, for misrepresenting drugs, bribing doctors, lying about safety. And yet, I could find very few examples of anybody being prosecuted, any person. And I argue you don't have to do a lot of that. If one or two executives who's been found to have committed crimes goes to prison, is prosecuted for this, I think everybody shapes up pretty quickly. I don't think you have to do prosecutions for years and years. I think they're going to clean up if they think somebody's
If
going
the
to go to prison.
CEO of Pfizer went to prison, it would put fear in the hearts of thousands of these crooks. That, and I'm not saying he's a crook. If he was put in prison for alleged crimes, it would put an end. And I think that the Justice Department then is very much involved here. Are you saying that the Justice Department is actually part of the, I call it sometimes a criminal conspiracy, which is against the law, but the collusion?
Yeah, I mean, that's been proven. And I've reported on, for example, the Department of Justice defends, believe it or not, vaccine makers in vaccine injury cases. The vaccine companies don't defend themselves. There's a special deal they made with Congress where the Department of Justice defends them. And we pay the damages so that the pharmaceutical and vaccine industry, when they're found guilty of a vaccine injury, doesn't come out of their pocket. We pay the damages through a tax or a fee that's on every dose of vaccine that we get. So they're wholly protected. So the Department of Justice is there trying to discredit the people who claim to have vaccine injuries. And I was able to find I think this is a huge story. Years ago, when some of the autism cases, vaccines causing autism, were going through special vaccine court, Department of Justice is defending the vaccines. Oh, the parents are crazy. This didn't happen. Their key expert witness, Dr. Andrew Zimmerman, a renowned pediatrician from Johns Hopkins at the time, he was their key witness saying vaccines can't cause autism, vaccines can't cause autism. At one point in time, and he signed an affidavit about this later, he goes to the Department of Justice as their expert witness and says, guess what? The science has changed. And I've learned that vaccines can and do cause autism in rare cases. And I even have some patients myself that this has happened to. What happens? Does the Department of Justice change its tact and start to acknowledge publicly what they've been told by their own expert witness? This is like the best friend of a robber saying my best friend did commit the robbery, you know? No, they fired Dr. Zimmerman as their expert witness. And as he points out, they go on to misrepresent his opinion in the court and tell the court, oh, we know Dr. Zimmerman says vaccines can't cause autism, when he told them the opposite. And then they went so far as to carve a case where they were finding that vaccines did cause a child's autism, big landmark case, carved it out of a big set of cases being heard, settled it confidentially, and then had it sealed so that the rest of the public would never know that the government had admitted vaccines cause autism, at least in this child in her circumstance. So these are ways in which the Department of Justice is complicit, has been complicit in all of it.
So is that Department of Justice defending pharmaceutical companies only doing so in the narrow area of vaccines, or is it doing it outside of vaccines as well?
Well, here's my opinion. When you look at the settlements, the government does go after the pharmaceutical industry when it finds that they've cheated the public on medicine. And as I said, I've listed some of those cases of alleged fraud when big payments have been made. But I also note, as we just discussed, that nothing really happens beyond these payments that the companies make. It's win-win for the Justice Department because they get some money. It doesn't come back to us. I never got a refund, from the government. One of these cases is settled. So they get the money, and the company goes on to live another day. The executives are rewarded because they only had to pay a little portion of the profits they made committing the alleged fraud. So everybody kind of wins, and the Department of Justice pretends it does prosecutions. I'm sure that on the prosecutorial level, there's probably very good lawyers working on these cases. I'm just pointing out that nothing meaningful ever seems to happen to stop the patterns. And after a company's found guilty of some kind of fraud, the FDA rarely, if ever, comes in and says, okay, here's your penalty since you lied or committed fraud. You can't present new drug applications to us for the next 5 years. I mean, nothing like that I've ever seen. Maybe it's happened, but certainly doesn't happen frequently. So it seems like the system is set up to pretend to do enforcement that's not really very meaningful.
Right. If I committed a heinous crime or fraud and someone fined me $5, I'm okay. You fine a drug company $5 million, $20 million, $50 million. Okay,
Off a drug that they made billions of dollars on.
Exactly. These kinds of enforcements and penalties are ludicrous.